All right, buddy. I know you want love and attention while I'm recording. Hi everyone, welcome back. My name is Diana. This is my channel, Bookish Di, and the void that you just saw is one of my cats, Luke. Welcome back. It has sure been a while since I recorded. I think the last time I recorded was in April. Yeah, it's been a while. 2020 sucked. I don't want to go too much into it, but and there goes my other cat. I don't want to get too much into it just because, yeah, it was not super great. As you can see from my recording setup, I'm in a different location. I'm currently staying with family. But yeah, 2020 was certainly a year. 2021 is, a week in, and yeah, don't know why we thought it would necessarily be better, but yeah. Anyway, I wanted to get back into doing videos and talking about books, so I figured doing a video, wrapping up my 2020 reading as well as looking ahead to 2021 and talking about some goals that I had was a good way to go about it. So without further ado, my 2020 in review. So in 2020, I read 90 books. 16 of which were rereads. That means 74 new to me books. And then out of that 90, 27 of those were books by authors by BIPOC authors. So that's about 30%, which is okay. I think I can definitely do better. I don't really have a genre breakdown done right now, mostly because I had started working on a book blanket, and I think that was something that I had talked about in one of my previous videos, and I'm still kind of working on that. But I stopped working on it when I hit a pretty bad patch of depression, and it was also a bit of a source of anxiety for me. So it was different than my scarf, because my scarf, I was just kind of trying to make sure I didn't have, you know, one big genre block, because I was trying to differentiate between books. But with the blanket, I was also, you know, not trying to do a big block, but also keeping track of rows and making sure that it wasn't just like a stripe of the purple I was using for fantasy. And so it was just kind of an added anxiety, like a stressor on my reading. And so that it didn't help when I was hitting a bad reading patch. So I'm going to try and finish the book blanket and show it off at some point this year. It is going to happen. But I'm not going to be using knitting to track my reading this year. I think I've learned my lesson, and I think I'd rather just work on different projects for that. So, yeah, that's kind of what happened with my 2020. And then in terms of goals for my reading in this upcoming year, I do have a couple of goals. The first of which is I'm going to try and read 40% books by BIPOC authors. As I said, I read 30% last year, and it was an okay percentage, but it wasn't, I know I can do better. And there's a lot of fantastic books by authors of color out there. And I really want to kind of grow my reading. So within that, I want to read more outside of my sci-fi fantasy bubble. So that's one of my goals. The two other goals that I have, one is to read 75 books. I think that's achievable. I've read, I think, at least 75 pretty much every year since I started tracking my reading. And then the final one is a carryover from last year, and to read more books that I own, because I have a really bad habit of buying books and hoarding them as a dragon hoards treasure and then never reading them. So that's something I'm going to try and do better on. So yeah, I'm trying to keep my goals low and achievable, and I think those three goals, reading more BIPOC authors, reading from my collection, and then reading 75 books total is a good way to go about it. Low stress, keep my anxiety low. I want to finish this video by talking about some of the best books that I read all year. They're going to be in no particular order except for the first, which is Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. This is the first book in an epic fantasy series in a Indigenous America inspired setting, and it is so good. It is about prophecy and vengeance and giant crows and so many capable ladies and classism and xenophobia. There's so much to love about this book. Rowan Horse's writing is always great, and this, honestly, I think is some of her best work. I did a combination of reading in print, as you can see, it is so pretty, and listening to the audiobook. And if you can do the audiobook, I highly recommend it. They have 4 different narrators for the 4 different main characters, and it is just phenomenally done. Like I said, there are 4 main characters, one of whom is the head priest of a city, one of whom is a ship captain, one is the vessel for a crow god, and one is the scion of the House of the Crow. And yeah, this was just so good. If you love fantasy, if you love great characters, if you love intricate plotting, and just I cannot recommend this book enough. It is so good. I am planning on nominating it for a Hugo Award, and I hope it gets on the ballot. The next book on my list is Return of the Thief by Megan Whalen Turner. This is the finale of her Queen's Thief series, and oh my god. So there was a lot of discussion going around Twitter, I would say within the last year or so, talking about finales and how people conceptualize finales. And one thing that was brought up in what makes a satisfying finale is that there's kind of emotional continuity, and the ending isn't so much of a sucks be you didn't see this twist coming, but as a culmination of all the work that's been put into a series. And for me, Return of the Thief really encapsulates that. It really puts a lid on the journey that Jen and the other characters have been taking throughout these books. And it does so in a way that leaves it open for future stories, but it's very much, this is the end of Jen's story. I don't want to get into too many details because this book is full of spoilers for the series. But I love this series, and I think this book was a really fitting finale, and I can't wait to reread the entire series knowing what it's leading up to. The next book on the list is Star Wars Dr. Aphra by Sarah Kuhn. This is, I think they described it as an audio drama. So this is an adaptation of the first Darth Vader comic book series, told from the perspective of our favorite rogue archaeologist, Lana Chelly Aphra. This was such a delight. Aphra is the definition of disaster lesbian, and Sarah Kuhn just really captured not only Aphra's voice, but the voices of all the different characters. You don't need to be super familiar with the Star Wars comics or the wider Star Wars the new expanded universe. The basic premise is Dr. Aphra is a rogue archaeologist who gets hired by Darth Vader to help him with a special project, and it kind of goes downhill from there. This book really makes use of the audio format because it's presented as Aphra recording her memoirs. And like the Count Dooku book published a couple of years ago, this is a full cast audio, and like I said, it was so well done. I can't wait to pick up the screenplay version, and I really hope we get more from Sarah Kuhn in Star Wars just because it was such a good fit, especially for how she writes Aphra. Next up is All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. This is a YA memoir, so it's detailing the author growing up in New Jersey, how he came out as queer, and his experiences both in high school as well as in college and finding his voice. And I listened to this on an audiobook, and it is really well done. It's very moving. It talks a lot about what it's like to grow up Black and grow up queer, and yeah, it was very moving. It's something I definitely want to re-listen to because I think there was just a lot in it. It's not super long, but it's very It's dense, and yeah, it was a really wonderful book, and I really can't wait to see what the author comes out with next. Next was Gods of Jade and Shadow by Silvia Moreno Garcia. So this book actually came out in 2009, but I didn't get around to reading it until this year. And it centers on young woman Cassiopeia, who is of Mayan descent, and her journey with the Mayan god of death across 1920s Mexico. And again, I love Silvia Moreno Garcia's writing, and this was no exception. Cassiopeia was prickly but kind, and I really loved her relationships with the other characters, and I thought it did a really good job of exploring family dynamics, class, race, in 1920s Mexico, which isn't a setting that we get a lot in. And yeah, I really love this book. I pretty much pick up everything Silvia Moreno Garcia writes at this point. She's one of my go-to authors. The next book that I really loved from 2020 is Braiding Sweetgrass: Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teaching of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this is a book, I listened to this on audiobook, and it's narrated by the author. And the author, she is an ecologist, I believe, and she focuses on plants, and particularly native plants in North America. And so this is talking about her relationship with the earth and with the plants, and talking about not just her relationship with it, but America in general, and talking about how we currently have a very destructive relationship with the world around us. It was a book that really made you think about how you interact with the world around you, as well as how you think about what gives us sustenance and what gives us comfort, and how you can give back, and what we as a society need to do to protect the world around us. And I'm gonna have to kick my cats out of this room. It was just a very moving book. It also talked a lot about how there's this symbiosis between plants and the indigenous communities. So talking about how certain trees, sweetgrass in particular, grows better when it's frequently harvested by indigenous communities, how certain communities would create sustainable growing locations and things like that, and the lessons that we can take from it. I would highly recommend this book if you're looking for a good nonfiction book. Again, I listened to the audio, and I would highly recommend the audio production. In 2020, I read a lot of the Vorkosigan series, and I loved pretty much all of them, but I only wanted to put one on this list, so the one I'm choosing is Memory. This is the book described in the Vorkosigan timeline as Miles Vorkosigan hits 30 and 30 hits back. And so this is a book that is very much a turning point in this series. So up to this point, Miles has been, I wouldn't say kind of cosplaying, but like he has two identities. He has Lord Miles Vorkosigan, heir to the Vorkosigan house, and Admiral Miles Naismith, who leads the Dendari fleet. And so this is a book where he has to come to terms with his identity and come to terms with the actions that he's taken, and the consequences of those actions, and it leads to him taking on a new role in the Vorkosigan Empire. But yeah, this was just so good. It had a lot of different relationships. It was very much the culmination of what Lois McMaster Bujold had been building. Say hi, Luke. Had been building with this world, and it has one of my favorite kind of sequences in terms of talking about how you move, like how you adjust to life-changing events, and it's just, you move on, you keep moving. Like, it's hard and it sucks, but if like you just keep moving, you keep living. And yeah, I love this series. I'm almost done. I have one book left. I'm kind of putting it off because I'm not quite ready to say goodbye to these characters yet. Another book that I really loved this year was Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky by Kwame Mabila. And this is part of the Rick Riordan Presents line. So it centers on Tristan Strong, who's this boy from Chicago who, after the traumatic death of his best friend, goes to live with his grandparents in Alabama. And he accidentally falls into a mythical world, chasing a character called Gum Baby, who's great. Gum Baby is one of my favorite characters. And he has to save this world where African-American legends and West African mythology live together. And it's about stories, it's about grief, it's about family. It's honestly, I think, my favorite Rick Riordan Presents book. It oh my God, these cats. It was just really well written. I really liked the character of Tristan. I thought his story about coming to terms with his grief, being a storyteller, helping heal this world, as well as the cast of characters, was just really good. There's a sequel out right now. I'm hoping to read it this year. And yeah, I've been really enjoying the Rick Riordan Presents line. And I think, like I said, though, out of the ones from this year that I read, Tristan Strong is my favorite. Another book that I read and loved this year was Riot Baby by Tochi Onyebuchi. And so this is a novella published by Tor.com about two siblings, Ella and Kevin. And it documents both Black hope and pain, the prison industrial complex, and how anger can be a way of breaking free. And this was one of the first books I read last year, and it was just really well done. His writing is phenomenal. Ella and Kevin are excellent characters. I thought that there was a lot of story packed into a relatively short package. And again, it's another book where I really hope it gets nominated for a Hugo. I think it was one of the best things Tor published last year. And I love this book. It was great. I have War Girls at home, and that's his YA novel, and I'm hoping to get around to reading that this year. Another book that I read and loved last year was Queen's Peril by E.K. Johnston. So I was trying to only have one Star Wars book on this list, but I ended up with two just because I loved Queen's Peril so much. So Queen's Peril is set before and during The Phantom Menace. It documents how Padme's handmaidens came together, the bonds that they forged, and then what they did during the invasion of Naboo. This is the second book that E.K. Johnston has written focusing on Padme and her handmaidens. And this is the book that I wish I had growing up. It's really obvious that E.K. Johnston comes to these characters from a place of love and a place of fandom, because it reads like fic, and I say that in the best possible way. It reads like the type of fic that you write when you have a favorite character and you want to trace how they live before the events and then document like the missing spaces between an episode or a movie. And it was so good. I really hope E.K. Johnston gets to write a third Padme novel, because I think there's definitely places where that could fit in. The last book I want to talk about for my favorite books of 2020 is Pale Horse, The Spanish Flu of 1918 and How It Changed the World by Laura Spinney. So I actually had this book on hold before the pandemic hit, and then I finally got it like a month or two into the pandemic. And I had read another book about the Spanish flu pandemic, and that one was okay. But this one was much better, and I think it's because this book wasn't focused on like the people who were like documenting the flu or trying to, heal it. It was focused very much on how it impacted people around the world and tracing how it changed how we do medicine, how society fits together, how things work. And it was just, like I said, I think it was much more compelling because it focused on those points rather than falling into the trap of like the great man narrative, which was what the other book did, which I didn't really like. And then what really catapulted this book onto my best of list was its final chapter, which focuses on the construction of memory and why we don't talk about the Spanish flu. So for example, I was talking with my grandmother, and her dad was alive during the Spanish flu, and she said he just never talked about it. And that's consistent across the board with this pandemic, where aside from like Pale Horse, which is a book published in the 1920s by a survivor of the Spanish flu, there just wasn't much like literature or film or kind of creative output that talked about the impact. And so one of the things that Spinney conjectures is that for things like war, it's easier to talk about because, you know, you have clear winners, clear losers, whereas with this pandemic, there were all losers. There was no winners. And it's interesting to think about in the context of our current pandemic, just because particularly in the United States where I am, there's such a huge impact. We have over 300,000 dead, over millions infected, and I don't know how we're going to remember it. I don't know if we're going to remember, you know, celebrating the doctors and first responders, or if we're going to remember it as the systematic failure of government that allow for it to reign unchecked. And yeah, it's something I think I might revisit once things are under control here, just because it is a very, very good book. There's a lot in it, but it's also something I think I need a little distance from in order to read again. So that is my 2020. Those are some of my favorite books. I did read more. I'm going to put a link to both my Goodreads and Storygraph in the description below. So yeah, I'm hopefully back. And if any of the books that I talked about were some of your favorite reads, or if you had another book that you really loved from 2020, let me know down below. And I will talk to you soon. All right, bye.